Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome today to what is the next in a series of webinars from the IMR, Irish Manufacturing Research. And I want to follow on particularly from last week's talk, where we discussed the economic impact of COVID-19 and how the IMR is helping industry emerge from that crisis. And we all accept we are firmly in a crisis. So today, I want to emphasize the importance of teams and how we can influence teams as a significant part of getting out of that crisis, and looking at these 17 tactics that will hopefully be of immediate benefit to you. There is a specific focus today around the teams that have been forced into a remote position. And this is important because many cross-functional or matrix-based virtual teams would be more used to a virtual environment, or certainly dealing with members that are virtual. But today is really to help the unfortunate people that find themselves under pressure and instead of being face-to-face, now have to deal with everything that means we're remote. That's quite a different scenario. So, brief introduction. We're then going to look at the impact on performance under force and remoteness, jump straight into the 17 tactics, and if we have time, wrap up with some insights from experience. With a change of this magnitude, where people have been forced to work remotely, it disrupts our expectations. And when our expectations have been disrupted, it reduces our sense of control. And this can really impact our ability to process information. But that's from the recipient's perspective. In terms of the person who's trying to manage and lead a remote team, I want you to start thinking about, how are you being perceived by the people who are listening to you and looking at you? Albert Mehrabian did some very interesting work, and he identified that we are actually influenced by roughly the body language and the way somebody is, as opposed to our tone of voice and our words. And this is really relating to someone's attitude and their levels of likability towards you. So it is very specific around that. But what this says to us in the IMR, in terms of how we're helping you to understand it, is we're at a loss here. Because if body language is 55%, we're losing a lot of that when we're working remotely. How will the audience react? This is a process created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It looks at morale and competence in time. But what it's really saying is that at a time of immense change and a crisis, we are in a state of shock, moving into denial, frustration and anger, etc. And the point in me showing you this is that not only are markets in shock, as we learned last week, but many people are still trying to adjust to very, very different environments. And that shock has got an impact. And it's got an impact, let alone with how people are being perceived, really around our attention. And this is the key impact. This is what I want the 17 tactics to really help you understand. And that's, how can we get people's attention when in fact we know that their ability to process information is being impacted because of this significant change? The loss of intentional control resulting in increased response errors is the result of this, and this is scientifically proven. So let's approach these 17 tactics with that in mind. How can we actually improve the attention for performance improvement? Neurologically, this has also been proven, because would you believe we attend to the world, therefore the world of work, in two different ways together. And if you're interested in any of that and why the brain may be divided, have a look at a book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. But attention is key. In fact, some people are thinking it may be the next serious resource shortage. I will supply a copy of these slides after the presentation, so don't worry about taking copious notes. Tactic 1. One word that influences attention on virtual teams. What could it be? Because. If you use the word because, it's been proven to increase compliance rates by 33%. Why? Because people are primed to comply when they hear the word. There have been some very interesting studies done, and there was one in the US through Xerox where somebody was trying to skip a queue to get photocopying done, and they had 3 subject trials coming in from the left-hand side, giving various excuses as to why they wanted to jump the queue. When the word because was used, compliance rates went up 33%, and people let them do it. What's really interesting about this point is it's less to do with the word than it is to do with the fact you're creating a reason. It doesn't matter what the reason is, but when you create a reason, it stops somebody from being less mindless and more mindful. If you're interested, you can look up some details on that at a later date. And Ellen Langer, professor in Harvard, has done some wonderful work on mindlessness versus mindfulness. Tactic 2, always set deadlines. What can deadlines achieve? A sense of urgency, holds team members accountable, provides a sense of encouragement, helps in determining priorities, provides a sense of accomplishment. But how is the best way then to set deadlines? Be fair and reasonable, be 100% clear cut, and always set them. This can avoid procrastination. And if you don't set deadlines, the work can get delayed. And this is because of what they call Parkinson's law, which is that work will expand to the available time allocated to it. So if you know something is going to take an hour, but you put 3 or 4 hours aside towards the end of the week, it will take 3 or 4 hours. Tactic 3, assign responsibility. Use direct language, ask for volunteers where appropriate, assign responsibility of tasks to individuals, not groups, and be mindful of assumptions. The thinking here is that we can assume, if we're dealing with a number of people in our remote team, that they're going to pick up certain tasks that we may not emphasize. And this goes back to what we call the bystander effect, where the quantity of onlookers and the quantity of participants doesn't give you the required help. There was an unfortunate incident in the States where somebody got repeatedly attacked over a half an hour period, and the research showed that there were 38 onlookers. Not one of them called the police, and this person died. When they studied this and did the interviews, each of the bystanders who could see each other from different apartment balconies felt that the other person is going to make the call. So if the bystander effect is going to impact something as serious as somebody's death, you can imagine how it might impact something a little bit more or less trivial around tasks. But it's important not to make the assumption that someone's going to pick up on that. Tactic 4, explain tasks. Know what you want. Be direct in your description. Be precise. Be specific. Avoid sarcasm. Be careful with nonverbal. This point has been aligned very nicely with an organization called Specialisterne. They're a Danish not-for-profit who have done a lot of work around autism on the spectrum. And they're looking at it from a business perspective. And the research is saying that when dealing with remote and virtual teams, we should be dealing with them similarly to how we may deal with people with autism. And what's interesting about this is Specialisterne are helping people to get back into work within the spectrum, and certain organizations have committed to 1% of their workforce coming from the spectrum because of the gifts that these people have. Tactic 5, when delegating tasks, write them out. Type out the verbal tasks in real time while your team is watching or listening. Obedience to authority. What do I mean by obedience to authority? Well, you may have read a book called Obedience to Authority, which was the Milgram experiment. And this goes back to really the power of the written word as well. But when people were being asked to conduct a certain exercise, when it was written down, it became more powerful. Likewise, the power of authority did some interesting testing around this. They put up big billboard saying Delaware closed in the States, and they tested a number of people coming into Delaware. Many stopped, turned around, and didn't go in. And others stopped to ask questions, when will it be open? So the power of the written word is very interesting. Tactic 6, the secret formula for establishing trust. A single lie destroys a whole reputation for integrity. Establishing trust. To increase trust among your team, you need to increase the level of reliability and or likability, or both. And this goes back to Meherbrin's study, because in many ways, how we're going to perceive people, if are we considering what they say, what the words they speak, their tone of voice, does their body language contradict what they say? How's that informing our levels of trust? Tactic 7, what does increasing reliability among your team look like to achieve that trust building process? Well, there are 4 steps. Verify the skills. Lead by example. Be explicit. Count on others. How do we increase the level of likability? Well, there are 4 steps to help you build likability in your team. Understand the person. Encourage social interaction. Keep in contact frequently. Build on the foundations of morale, which are spiritual, psychological, and material. And as I say, this links back to Meherbrin at a later date. Happy to take any questions on further detail around these at a later stage. Tactic 9, 6 steps to ensure 100% commitment. There is a difference between commitment and compliance. As you know, we were creating a reason in Tactic 1 by using the word because, which increased compliance rates. Commitment is different. When we're trying to engender commitment in somebody, that's similar to somebody deciding to follow a leader. When you decide to follow somebody, you're committing to them. This releases different levels of discretionary effort, which are what all of us are going to be relying on through these difficult times. We need people to go over and above the call of duty. Well, they'll only do that if they're committed, and they'll only commit if they feel that they are part of something that they've got faith in, and faith in that cause. After you assign an action to someone, ask them to repeat it back to you. Set a deadline. Show how you will alter your plans because of their help. Create a sense of conscience as you are now dependent on them. Confirm the task by saying, so I'll definitely be getting a copy of that on Friday before 11, yeah? A day or so after requesting their help, send a reminder of the task and appeal to their commitment. So looking at those slightly differently, ask a team member to repeat the task back to you, but get a time frame. Develop an obligation. Stress the importance. Confirm action. And show appreciation. Tactic 10. Know what someone is really thinking. Meet one-to-one. Something we don't often think of doing virtually. Then ask one of 2 questions. What do you value about the work over and above completing the task or activities that we're getting through? What would you do differently? There are additional questions you may consider asking. What would it take for you to love the task? How do you think it can make it better? What would it take for you to be really excited? What would you do differently? But the important thing here is that these questions assume they accept the task, and it makes them more comfortable. The other very important thing about point A there, in terms of valuing, as managers, we quite often don't understand what people value over and above doing the work, because we think more of the compliant nature. Aren't they getting paid? Don't they have a job? If we don't ask them what they value, well, then we're not going to be in a position to help them attain personal value through the work. If we're not helping our direct reports to attain value through their work, they're not going to be able to discover meaning in the work. So I think it's very important. And those values may be, somebody could be feeling quite ambitious, or they may be happier to do more technical skills, and we can help them by looking at where they can fit into maybe other teams, and then we can show them how those values can be achieved. That engenders a lot of trust and works towards the beginning of commitment. Tactic 11, leave the perfect voice message. You might wonder, do we do this anymore these days? Well, not as often because with instant messaging, but there are the occasion where it's important to leave a message. So let's look at what makes a good one. Well, why are you calling? What you need them to do? How they can reach you? But there is a sequence. So obviously say their name, give your information, state the time and date, explain the objective, explain the action item, leave your number, and leave your number a second time. And don't speak too quickly, leave it clearly. I'm sure we've all remembered the time where someone's left a number 087226271. Look forward to hearing from you. Now, I know on mobile phones you get the number and you can call back, but no harm reminding ourselves. Tactic 12, writing assertive emails. Does anyone read long emails anymore? I don't think so. Keep them short and concise, highlighting your calls to action. Okay. An example of using bold and some copy would be, John, as part of IMR's Executive Education in Industry 4.0, the additive manufacturing team is running a training course from IMR Mullingar on Thursday 17th. You need to include slides from the highlighted list below, with particular attention to point 4 highlighted in red, by Tuesday the 15th at 4 p.m, because format has moved to virtual classroom. Polymer and metal additive manufacturing, design for additive manufacturing, cost modeling and product life cycle, and standard and future trends. Thanks, Peter. So assertive emails are key, breaking through the clutter, keeping them short and concise. Tactic 13, what you should do before every meeting. 5 things you need to ask. Do I need to have this meeting? Is there a reason for it? What's my goal? Can I reduce attendees to keep focus? Do I need an agenda with discussion points? Will I send out reminders after the invite is gone? So decide on the need, define the objective, determine the attendees, draft the agenda, and then obviously send out the invite. Tactic 14, what should you do during every meeting? Appoint a leader. Go through the agenda. Remain on topic. Capture minutes. Close with a review. This keeps things focused. And of course, we all know if we don't appoint a leader, then everyone's a leader. Tactic 15, what you should do after every meeting. 2 things. Distribute your meeting minutes, follow up with a written summary, and don't forget these are the minutes that you've written down live during the meeting. Save a copy in a shared file. Tactic 16, use your voice to your advantage. Again, back to how we're perceived. This becomes more important in a virtual world. And one way to know how good your tone of voice is to record it. Many people don't like the sound of their own voice. Some people don't like the look of their own faces, which is a tough station if you don't like both. But it's worth recording and getting used to how you sound. But you've got to be very careful. 4 tips that'll give you an advantage when you talk to your team. Tone, speed, enunciation, and the 4th and most important one, practice silence, because it really is golden. Many people are uncomfortable with silence, but it's extremely effective, but does need practice. So people listen to not only what you say, but also how you say it. We know the written word is important, but we also know that without the body language, depending on whether your relationships are new or existing, levels of trust and perception can be derived from that. Tactic 17, make your emails stand out using a subject line. So one study says we spend 28% of our week managing email. So 3 things to consider. Write their name in the subject box, summarize the email's topic, write down a deadline. I'm going to throw in a 4th here as well. Quick request can also get the attention. and can be very helpful. But to get a faster reply, these can sometimes break through the clutter. Okay. So that is the 17 tactics. I hope that they will be either a useful reminder to many of you, one or two new tips possibly, but they should be of immediate use and worth considering. We do need to help get our teams up to a higher level of productivity now that we've all been forced into this position. I hope you've got value from that. I would like to wrap up by focusing on hope for a moment, because I know this is important to the IMR and it's important to me. What I didn't tell you in the introduction is that my background is as a practitioner in logotherapy and existential analysis, which was created by Viktor Frankl, who was the professor of neurology and psychiatry, Viennese professor. I was interested in none of that, funnily enough, but when I heard he had survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, I said, this is a psychiatrist worth listening to. The focus is really around primary motivation, attitudinal change, and meaning discovery through personal performance. So what's really important about this thinking is that hope is an act of will. It's a capacity of the soul. So when people have faith in a cause, or when they have belief in your company or your team, they're accessing those capacities. We discussed earlier the impact of such an enormous change, how it disrupts our expectations, reduces our control, the ability to affect how we process. Many of us are concentrating less, we get distracted easily. That leads to discouragement and disappointment if we're not careful. And we saw the graph there from Kubler-Ross. So you really need to spend a little bit of time thinking about, where do I need to start building encouragement? Okay, there's high anxiety and stress, and we need to encourage people. One thing I would ask you to do is go back to tactic 1. By helping people understand the reasons why they're making these commitments. We need to remind them of the reasons why they're self-distancing, the reasons why some are self-isolating. Remind them also about the fact that maybe many have not lost anything that's irreplaceable. Some sadly have lost what's irreplaceable, but many haven't. And in reminding them of those reasons, I think you will help them to realize that actually what they're doing means that their suffering becomes a sacrifice. And that's important. It's a sacrifice on behalf of others. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today on the Friday of a bank holiday, the 1st of May. We're all very grateful at the IMR. Thank you. Take care and good luck.
Thanks very much, Peter. We actually have a question or two, and we still have a few minutes. So we have a question here from Pascal Pollitt, who's joining us from Belgium this morning. Which one is the most powerful tactic for virtual teams, and what's your number 1 tip?
I think we have to first of all understand, is that virtual team intact? Are they managing a number of projects within a program, therefore experienced? Or is it a virtual team like we're discussing today that's been forced into the position, and therefore the manager of that team and the employees who are remote are all struggling? I think if we take it as being the latter, which is really what today is all about, I would say the most important one is probably to create reasons, to help people really understand the reasons behind all of this, how we're trying to make it work, and then using those reasons in order to help focus their attention. Attention is key here. Don't forget, we're attending to everything in 2 different ways together. We've got broad attention and narrow. We've got to get people down to the narrow, focused attention at the times that matter. We can't live there. It's too exhausting. But in order to do that, I would suggest concentrate on reminding the reasons and creating the reasons. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks, Pascal, for the question. And we'll get one more in. Is there an ideal length of time for a meeting, and does that vary from virtual meetings to when you're meeting people in person?
In my experience, no, there is no ideal time. It's a case of if you go through the key points we mentioned here, and it is necessary, and you've selected the appropriate number of people, and you have an agenda, getting through that agenda is the appropriate time for that meeting to be conducted within.
And is there any maximum or minimum amount of people for a meeting?
No. Again, though, in the majority of cases, there have been too many people in meetings. So I would suggest you focus back on who really is necessary here. And people will appreciate getting that time back when they're not invited. But don't forget to let them know why they're not being invited so that they don't feel they've been left out. It's so important to over communicate at this time and to look at being very empathetic. People's sensitivities are heightened, and therefore what might seem unnatural to us, we need to remind ourselves to over communicate on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We will be making a PDF of Peter's presentation available, and keep an eye out for our next webinars and for our newsletter. Thank you again, and stay safe.